Hello students, welcome to Darasa Online. My name is Idris Msuya. I'm here to give you the revision of History Paper 2. And today we are going to look at neocolonialism and underdevelopment in the third world countries. My dear students, this topic of neocolonialism and underdevelopment of third world countries has 4 subtopics. The first subtopic is the concept of neocolonialism and underdevelopment. The second subtopic is the manifestation of neocolonialism, and the third subtopic is about the causes of underdevelopment, and the last subtopic, my dear students, is about the efforts which have been employed so far to solve the problem of underdevelopment of the third world countries. My dear students, for today we are going to focus on 2 subtopics. We are going to look at neocolonialism and underdevelopment as the concept. We are going to look at manifestation of neocolonialism, and we are going to look at causes of underdevelopment in developing nations. My dear students, what is the rationale of studying this topic? Why are we studying this topic, especially at this time when you, my dear students, you are preparing for your national examination? This topic is very important, my dear students, because of the fact that this topic includes some of the current affairs. It includes some of the contemporary issues, the issues which keep on happening in the world, and they can be part and parcel of your exam. So getting knowledge about this topic, it will help you at least to use the knowledge that you have got and associate with what is going on in the world, and it will put you in a good position to attempt any question in case a question comes from this topic. My dear students, we have got some objective of this lesson. Why are we studying this lesson? What do we want to achieve at the end of this lesson? The first thing we want to achieve is, explaining the concept of neocolonialism and underdevelopment, and second, assessing the nature and the character of a neocolonial power, and the third is to assess the internal and external causes of underdevelopment. My dear students, after the end of our discussion, my dear students, you have to make sure that you are able to attempt these questions. The first question is, how would you recognize a neocolonial power? How would you recognize that this is a neocolonial power? How do you recognize it? Because we've got so many countries in the world. We used to have some socialist countries, capitalist countries, but not all capitalist countries they can come seriously as a neocolonial power. So how do you identify a neocolonial power? That is something which you have to know to do it at the end of our lesson. But the second is the question that the freedom achieved by most African countries in 1960s was political. In reference to neocolonialism, justify this statement that what African countries got was just political independence, not economic independence, not social independence, not cultural independence, but political independence. Also, we are going to see this, but make sure that at the end of our discussion, at the end of our lesson, you are able to attempt this question. And the third question is, why African states are termed as underdeveloped nations, despite having abundant natural resources. We have got a lot of resources, but still African countries are termed as underdeveloped nations. Why? You have also to make sure that you are able to attempt this question at the end of our lesson. My dear students, let's now go to the concept of neocolonialism. How do you understand this? How do we understand this concept of neocolonialism? This concept of neocolonialism was introduced by Dr. Kwame Nkrumah in 1966 in his book called the Neocolonialism. Nkrumah introduced this in the book called the Neocolonialism, where he explained a lot of things regarding neocolonialism, and that neocolonialism is a threat that third world countries, African countries, were now facing after their independence. That means a country which was once under colonial rule, that country achieved its national independence. But the kind of independence it has achieved, according to Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, it was not an economic independence. It was not a cultural or social independence. Rather, it was just a flag independence. It was just a flag independence. So this is the way Dr. Kwame Nkrumah has defined neocolonialism. Neocolonialism is institutionalized by using some, different imperialist international agencies. For instance, they use things like General Agreement on Trade and Tariff. They use WTO, World Trade Organization. They use World Bank. They use International Monetary Fund. They use UN. And and other UN agencies. This is exactly what these people are doing. My dear students, here, of course, as I've said, there is open door policy, British Commonwealth of Independent States. This is the way neocolonialism was introduced after the independence of some African countries. For instance, if you look at this map, of course, we have got also the French organization, the Francophone state. You can look at this map. This map shows the Commonwealth of Independent States. These were the former British colonies, Canada, the African countries, as you can see, India, and so on and so forth. So after independence of these countries, they still continue to have a tie with the British, and they were under Queen of England, or King of England. This is called the Commonwealth. This is the way which has been established to make sure that even after independence there is the tie between these countries. Also, this is the Francophone state, the state which are speaking French language, the former French colonies. These colonies also have a tie with with their former colonial power. My dear students, here we have got another concept of underdevelopment. Underdevelopment, this concept of underdevelopment was defined by many people, but one of the renowned scholars who defined this concept very well is Professor Walter Rodney. Professor Walter Rodney has defined this concept very well, and in fact he said development is a comparison phenomenon. And wherever you have some country which is developed, then that country has developed for the sake of others which has been underdeveloped, because they say development is something not original. And we have got three situations: development, underdevelopment is undeveloped. So he said African countries, they might be once undeveloped, but they have never been underdeveloped. So underdevelopment, according to Walter Rodney, is the consequence of these third world countries coming into contact with the European countries during the, of course, for Africa, it was during the 15th century and so on. But there are some others like Andre Gunder Frank, who defined development. Of course, he said there is development of underdevelopment. That development is not original or tradition. Underdevelopment is not original or tradition. It's something which has been introduced. And of course, this man came with the dependence theory, my dear students. As you can see, this is the way it is explained, that the relationship between center and the periphery is what contribute to underdevelopment of the third world countries, as you can see in this. This is the core, this is semi-periphery. The core, of course, is the first world countries, and semi-periphery is the second world country, and the periphery is the third world countries. And you can see this third world are producing raw materials, and the first world are producing industrial goods. So because of the relations that exist between these countries, it is contributing to the underdevelopment of the periphery countries and development of the core countries. This is the Frank dependent theory, the theory by Andre Gunder Frank. And underdevelopment, therefore, is viewed as externally induced problem. Some scholars, they see development as externally induced problem, that it is perpetuated by a small but powerful domestic elite. Some people within, they perpetuate that, and this was explained by the former president of Brazil, who was called Henrique Cardoso, who came with the theory which is called the internal colonialism. That's exactly what leads to underdevelopment. My dear students, as you can see, Walter Rodney's book, How Europe Developed Africa, he's speaking about European countries scrambling for Africa. This has not ended with the scramble that we have studied, which occurred in 1884-85. But even today, Western countries, they are scrambling to get some pieces of land in Africa. My dear students, let's now look at the nature and the character of the colonizing power. How are you going to know that this is the colonizing power? The first thing is that the colonizing power, it is democratic in nature. They always practice democracy, and they want to export that democracy to the neocolonial state. But why? Because one of the way they can introduce their control over a third world country is to introduce democracy, which we call a shallow democracy. They introduce multi-party system to low developed countries, and they can use multi-party system to put their leader into power. And those leaders, therefore, they are going to work as the puppet leaders. My dear students, the second here is expansionist in character. They've got the tendency of expanding their territories. Remember, they are not expanding as we saw it in colonialism, that they want to control their subjects. No. This time they just want to expand by investing, by establishing military bases, by exploiting resources of third world countries and so on. And in America, this one is explained as dollar imperialism. They just want to control the world economy. The third is interference of the internal matters of the low developed countries. They want to interfere the internal matter of the low developed countries. We said earlier in the previous topic, the United States of America, for instance, as a leading imperialist nation, has assumed a role of being the policeman of the world by trying to control the world, direct or indirect. Sometimes they can use their military power to invade and overthrow the leaders of a certain third world country, leaders of a certain third world countries. For instance, here we have got the example of Libya. The way Libya in 2011 and 2012, because of the development of some civil war in Libya, then the Western countries, led by USA, in fact led by NATO under USA, they invaded Libya and overthrew President Muammar Gaddafi, because Gaddafi was not good of friends to the Western countries. But why? Because they want to control the Libyan oil. So sometimes they can use that. And they have even influenced the UN to pass what is called a responsibility to protect, R2P, responsibility to protect. This was passed in 2000 to allow the big countries under the umbrella of UN to invade any countries, pretending that they are going to prevent the crime against humanity. That if there is genocide or crime against humanity, then those people have the power and mandate of invading any countries, trying to stop it. But this has been misused, that they invaded in Iraq to overthrow Saddam Hussein, they invaded in Libya to overthrow Gaddafi, they even participated in some coup d'etat in different parts of the world. Another thing here is the military technology superiority. These countries are very powerful in terms of military, and they have established military bases almost all over the world. The military bases are spread all over the world by those imperialist countries, because those military bases are so important for them to defend their interests. They want to defend their investment. Remember, one among the manifestation of this neocolonialism is the spread of multinational corporations. So they go to invest in third world countries, but how are they going to defend their investments? One of the things they do, it is to establish military base, but they have also to use some mechanism to defend a puppet leader they have installed, and for that case, they have to come with the establishment of military base. My dear students, another way in which you can know the neo-colonizing power, it is cultural superiority. Those countries are very, very superior in terms of culture. And here we are talking about the role of media. The role of media. Their medias are very powerful. We can speak of CNN, we can speak of BBC, we can speak of France International, you can speak of ABC, and so many other international medias and so on. So for that case, my dear students, this is another way in which you can recognize the neo-colonizing power. But another way is that they dominate international organization. They dominate international organization. They dominate the World Trade Organization. They dominate the UN. They dominate GATT, General Agreement on Trade and Tariff. They dominate IMF and the World Bank. When I say they dominate, it means those countries have got the lion's share, and no decision can be made without their consent. We know, for instance, in World Trade Organization, there is an equal trade between the third world countries and developed countries. But those countries, those imperialist countries, the neo-colonizing power, they are always rejecting to reform World Trade Organization. They are rejecting to reform UN. For instance, there has been some cry that has been for so long that some countries want to reform the UN, at least to increase the number of the permanent members. But they have always been rejecting because they want to maintain the status quo. They just want to maintain that system in which they have the power to make decisions, and they do not want the third world countries to be involved in making such big decisions and so on. My dear students, after looking at that, let's now go to look at manifestation of neocolonialism. How neocolonialism is implemented in the third world countries. The first way, it is through multinational corporations and the plight of capital. There is multinational corporations. Multinational corporations, this simply means the corporations, the companies that operate in more than one countries. And such companies are operating in third world countries. And those companies, they are so important in exporting capital, in exporting profit to the developed countries. There are so many companies. We have got some companies like Nike, Puma, IT&T, International Telegraph and Telephone, which has been operating in Chile and involved in the coup d'etat of Chile in 1972. My dear students, you can see this is the public notes, which can be seen in Nigeria in the oil-producing area. Prohibition, water not fit for use, as you can see, by order of hydrocarbon pollution. This is explaining the way those multinational corporations destroy the environment and the way people of Africa suffer for nothing. And also you can see this is the polluted area, also in Ogoni land. You remember, my dear students, Ken Sarawiwa, the one who was fighting for the survival of the Ogoni people during those days before being given a death sentence. This is the area which has been so highly polluted because of oil which is produced in Niger Delta. So, my dear students, you can see the way people of Africa suffer, but the companies which involve here, Shelley and others, they are getting a lot of profit. My dear students, just look at this. Just look at this. These are the critics. They have just tried to explain about the people who are defending this neocolonialism and those who are criticizing neocolonialism. That multinational corporations, that maybe they're good, maybe they're bad. These are the critics and these are the defenders. My dear students, let's now come to the second point, making the third world countries the producers of raw materials and the price taker. The third world countries have been made the producers of raw materials. They produce raw materials and they have no say about the price of what they are producing. So you produce raw material, but you have no say. You are price taker. Third world countries are price taker. And the Western countries are price maker. They make the price, and third world countries, they take the price. What does it mean? It means they have no say about the price of what they are producing. That is very strange. It is very strange, my dear students, that you can't make the price of what you are producing, and you can't even make the price of what has been produced by the Europeans and so on, or the developed countries. My dear students, this is the quote from a man called Ernesto Che Guevara. How can it be mutually beneficial to sell at the world market the raw materials that cost the underdeveloped countries immeasurable sweat and suffering? You can see these are the words by Che Guevara. He's trying to explain how third world countries suffers in the world market by being forced to sell their product at a very low price. My dear students, another way which neocolonialism manifests itself is through the use of puppet leaders. They are using puppet leaders. We have the leaders, as we said earlier, who have been either elected through democratically process, sponsored by the Western countries, or who came to power through coup d'etat, and those leaders are turning out to become the puppet of the Western countries. They are there to fulfill the interest of the Western countries. In Africa, we used to have people like Mobutu, for instance. In Central America, for instance, we used to have people like Anastasio Somoza, who was the leader of Nicaragua. There was Fulgencio Baptista, who was the leader of Cuba before he was overthrown by Fidel Castro. The fourth, my dear students, this is the example of the countries which once has been, led by the puppet leaders. This arrow, of course, it shows a country called Chile, which was led by Augusto Pinochet, who came to power after he overthrown a democratically elected leader, Salvador Allende. But here we have also, another country, Congo DR. Of course, we said it was an Mobutu, right? And here, of course, we have another country. This was supposed to be, Ivory Coast, and so on and so forth. So this is the map to show the puppet leadership in the world. My dear students, another way is through military coup d'etat, that the Western countries can sponsor the coup d'etat, where the leaders who has been democratically elected can be overthrown, and their place can be taken by, some leaders who are supported by the Western countries, because they knew that with those leaders in power, they are going to fulfill their interest. And remember, their interest under neocolonialism, it is to exploit the third world countries, to exploit the resources of third world countries, and to come to invest in third world countries, and so on and so forth. My dear students, this is the map to show the successful coup d'etat in the world. of course, as you can see and read this, that's how many times the coup d'etat has occurred in the countries regarding to the color which has been put here in the map. This is the examples. My dear students, another point here is the establishment of military base. The military bases were established by the imperialists over the world to safeguard the capitalist interest. This, of course, we have said it already. Military bases were established in different parts. Another thing is the introduction of free market economy and trade liberalization. They came to introduce free market economy, which, of course, as we have said, free market economy, it means that the introduction of capitalism, whereby whereby there can be trade liberalization, and this is very important to allow the inflow of commodities from from the developed countries to come to our country, and this led to the collapse of our industries. We shall come to see as we proceed. This was implemented through the introduction of structural adjustment program, which was earlier presided by what was called the Economic Recovery Program, ERP. My dear students, another point here is through the use of international financial institutions, the use of World Bank and IMF, which set some conditions. They put some conditions which were so harsh to the third world countries, the conditions which led to the death of our industries and so on, the conditions which made the third world countries to become the producers of raw material and the producers of raw materials and, of course, the price taker, as we have said, and the consumer of European industrial goods, or the Western countries, the capitalists, the imperialist industrial goods, so to say. Another point here is through the use of financial and technological assistance. We get some assistance, either financial or technological, from those developed countries. But if you look, some scholars like Dambisa Moyo, she wrote a book which is called Dead Aid, and that in that book, Dead Aid, Dambisa Moyo said there is no such a free lunch. There is no such a free lunch. That means we do not have to expect to get a free lunch for that case. And Dambisa Moyo, as you can see, the notion that aid can alleviate systematic poverty has done so is a myth. Millions of Africans are poorer today because of aid. Misery and poverty have not ended but increased. Aid has been and continue to be an unmitigated political, economic, and humanitarian disaster for most parts of the developing world. These are the words, a quote from Dambisa Moyo. My dear students, another point here is through the use of mass media globalization, both electronic and written media, such as TV, internet, telephone, fax, and so on and so forth. This, of course, we have got some United States, they have got US Information Services, British Council, Alliance Francaise, also we have got the Goethe Institute, and so on. This, of course, is the cartoon that shows that in the previous time we have the West and this is slavery. But after the independence of some African countries, third world countries, here you have the West, and this person is holding a file, and this is the media. So it means Africans now are tied through medias, and there are some files. So you can see the situation has changed, but this African person is the same. My dear students, another point here is direct military intervention, as the case of Libya, Grenada, of course, I've said about it. Also, this is the cartoon that shows people who have invaded. Of course, it's not looking well. But now that we have destroyed your country, you can pay us to rebuild it. We accept oil. The last one is through brain drain. Through brain drain. That is the last point. Brain drain, it means people of the third world countries, they are taken to work. They are going to work in the developed countries by looking for the green pastures. So people are being educated by using the money of third world countries. They are invited to go to work in the Western countries. That also lead to, it's one of the way neocolonialism manifests itself. After that, my dear students, let's now go to internal causes of underdevelopment, underdevelopment in developing nations. The first is excessive corruption. I think this one you know. Corruption can be of the two types. It can be grand corruption, it can be petty corruption, but what we are talking of here is the grand corruption. We have the example of Kenya, for instance. There was Anglo Gold in Kenya. Also in the world, third world countries, there have been a Panama scandal, which has been so highly spoken in the world. But here is the example of petty corruption and the grand corruption. Another thing is maladministration. Maladministration, the action of the government causing injustice, and so on and so forth. Another point here is about tribalism, nepotism, and religionism. Tribalism, nepotism, this also causes underdevelopment of third world countries. This is Nigeria, as you can see. It has been so highly pronounced for tribalism. Yoruba, Igbo, and the Hausa. These three groups have been so dominant in Nigerian politics, and it has always been a problem. Another thing is civil war and political instability. This, of course, was so common in different parts of Africa. As you can see, this map shows the countries in Africa which has been either facing civil unrest or political instability or even civil war. Another thing is poor economic policies and planning. This, of course, also is one of the reasons for underdevelopment of the developing nations. They do not plan well. Another thing is low level of education and ignorance. Low level of education and ignorance. The level of education of these countries is very low, and it cannot. Remember, education is very important if one wants to bring changes to the country. Another thing is diseases. Disease also is one of the problems that led to underdevelopment of third world countries. Bad governance and lack of democracy. There is no democracy. And if there is democracy, it's what we call a shallow democracy. Democracy that does not involve people. Always in Africa, democratic election has been always ended with some political violence and so on. We have the example of Malawi, we have the example of Kenya, we have the example of country like Nigeria, Senegal, and so on and so forth. Okay, so let's now move to external causes of underdevelopment in developing nations. What are the external causes of underdevelopment? Of course, we have already looked at the internal causes of underdevelopment. Now let's look at the external causes. And external causes of underdevelopment, this of course is mainly explained by some scholars like Walter Rodney, scholars like Andre Gunda Frank, scholars like Lippi, and some others who tries to put the blames of underdevelopment of the third world countries to the external world. They are saying that, of course, we know that there should be internal factors for development, but if it is to wait, they put more blames to the external world than the internal than the internal affairs. That is what has been responsible for underdevelopment of third world countries. My dear students, the first here is unequal exchange. Unequal exchange, this has been practiced for so long. It started during mercantilism, where third world countries, particularly African countries, they used to exchange goods with the European during mercantilism in a very unequal term. For instance, during slavery, the Africans used to give the slaves to the Europeans in exchange with some inferior goods, like looking mirrors, for instance. Things, of course, like outdated wines, guns, and so on, things which were so destructive. In exchange, they gave us, we gave them things like slaves who were so important in production in North America and West Indies. We gave them things like copper. We gave them things like rhinoceros horn, animal skins, and so on. Commodities which were so important. So you can see there was an equal exchange. And this is still continuing up to now, that there is an equal exchange in the world market, where, of course, we said earlier, the third world countries are price taker and the developed countries are price maker. Third world countries have no say about the price, and this is what has been debated for so long in the World Trade Organization, and the Western countries always, they are rejecting to change the system that has been so dominant since then. Another thing is brain drain. People who have been educated in the third world countries, they are taken to work in the developed countries. So if we have people who are so good in a certain knowledge, particularly in science and technology, those people are taken to work in developed countries. United States of America, for instance, they had a system which is called a green card system that allow people from the third world countries to go to work and live in America with their family. But you must have some qualifications, and one of the qualifications is you must have a certain knowledge which is so wanted in the United States. So this is another example. The third thing is importation of ready-made goods. Importation of ready-made goods which compete for market with the locally produced goods. They import ready-made goods to Africa. This also started during mercantilism, during colonialism, and even proceeded during neocolonialism as we speak now. They are importing their goods to the third world countries. But remember, when they import their goods, because of the quality of their goods, our goods, the third world countries' good cannot compete with the imperialist good. So as a result, the third world industries, they are dying a natural death because they cannot compete with the with the industries of those developed countries. Another thing is the role of multinational corporations. Multinational corporations are stealing the resources of the people of the third world countries. As we have said earlier, these multinational corporations, they are stealing a lot of money. There is what we call capital flight, that profit which is generated from the third world countries, it is taken, of course, to bring development elsewhere. I gave you the example earlier. Just look at the Niger Delta in Nigeria, and look at the way people are living there. And where had the money gone? Because there are some companies which are exploiting oil there. The money which has been generated from the oil exploited in that Niger Delta, it is taken to bring development in America, in England, or in France. But look at the life of the people who are living in that Niger Delta. Their life is miserable. And why? It's because of these multinational corporations. And these corporations, some of them, as we have said, they are so powerful. They have got the budget which is much more bigger than the national budget of some countries. There was one company which was called the IT&T, the International Telegraph and Telephone Company, which was operating in Chile. That company was involved in the overthrowing of the president of Chile of that time, who was called Salvador Allende. Salvador Allende was overthrown, and his place was taken by a dictator who became so fierce, a merciless dictator who was called Augusto Pinochet, and that was 1972. So you can see this is just one of the examples of these multinational corporation, my dear students. Another thing here is the political intervention, either direct or indirect. We have, for instance, witnessed the invasion of some countries of the third world. There was invasion which occurred in 1982 in Grenada by United States. Also, 1982. In 1992, United States also invaded Panama to overthrow the president of Panama, who was called Noriega. And also, United States, with NATO, they invaded in Libya to overthrow Muammar Gaddafi. Also in Iraq. So you can see these countries also, they're involving indirect or indirect political interventions, particularly to those leaders of the third world countries who have refused to become the puppet of the Western countries. There's also something going on in Venezuela, for instance. Venezuela is facing some sanctions. Cuba is facing some sanctions, and so on and so forth. Another thing here is the high debt caused by high interest, charged by the international financial institutions. There is very high debt. Very high debt has been become one of the problems of third world countries. The third world countries now are qualified as one of the highly indebted countries in the world because of the money, because of the loan they have taken from the international financial institutions. This is also another problem. Another thing is fluctuation of the price of oil in the world market. The fluctuation of the price of oil in the world market. This, of course, we can make reference particularly to 1970s, where the rise of the price in the world market has contributed to the collapse of many third world countries' economy, because they were spending a lot of money to buy oil, and they couldn't get some, they couldn't have some other money to use to buy some other needs. So for that case, third world countries suffered a lot. Another point here is the effect of globalization. Because of globalization, the whole world is politically, economically interconnected. The globalization, it means now whatever happens in the United States, third world countries are going to be affected. That if anything happened in Washington, D.C., in London, then we people of third world countries, we are going to be affected because the world has been interconnected. So if the American economy goes down, it's always that some other third world countries' economy is going to go down as well. So this has to become another very big problem to the third world countries. My dear students, let us now come to an end of our discussion. We are going for the break, and I'll be back, and we'll try now to answer the questions which I provided to you earlier. Welcome back, my dear students. Just now you can see the questions that I gave you in the beginning of our revision lesson. the first question, remember, was how would you recognize a neocolonial power? The second question, freedom achieved by most African countries in 1960s was political. In reference to neocolonialism, justify this statement. And the third question was why African states are termed as underdeveloped nations despite having abundant natural resources. These were the three questions that I gave you, my students. Now I think after going through this lesson, after going with me in this lesson, now I believe you can answer this question. So please just go with me and look at the answers to this question and try to rate yourself whether did you really have the same answers as what I'm giving you. So how would you recognize a neocolonial power? Here we have got a very important thing. Who is this neocolonial power? Neocolonial powers. Of course, we are talking of an imperialist country which introduces neocolonialism. An imperialist countries which introduces neocolonialism. That's what it means by a neocolonial power. We are talking of those imperialist countries like United States of America, like the British, like the French, like the Germans, like the Belgium, the Spanish, the Portuguese, and so on and so forth. Those are the neo-colonial powers. So, my students, how can you recognize that this is a neo-colonial power? Why? Because remember, you will not find a place written that this is a neo-colonial power. You'll have to go through that country and look at the characteristics of that country, and so you'll make a decision at the end that this is really a colonial power. The first way we can use to recognize a neo-colonial power, it is that it is first democratic in nature. It is democratic in nature. Remember, because they are capitalist countries, most of them believed in democracy. They believed in democracy. So they also want to introduce democracy to the countries where they want to introduce neocolonialism. But remember we said earlier, the kind of democracy these people want to introduce is what we call a shallow democracy. A shallow democracy. Democracy that does not really intend to bring a real changes to the country to the country where they want to introduce neocolonialism. They just introduce democracy, which will enable them to put into power the leaders of their choice. Remember, the aim of this democracy, it is to put into power a puppet leader. A puppet leader who is going to be their puppet. That's what they want. So the first way you can recognize the neocolonial power is that it is democratic in nature because they want to introduce democracy, which we said it is shallow democracy. One of the ways they use to establish the puppet leadership, it is through the use of democracy. But sometimes if they fail to use democracy, they can use coup d'etat. If they fail to use this shallow democracy, they can use coup d'etat. But then it is democratic in nature. The second way that we can use to recognize this neocolonial power, it is that it is expansionist in character. It is expansionist in character. Expansionist in character. What do we mean when we say expansionist in character? Expansionist in character, it means that they believe in expanding. But remember, at this time of neocolonialism, they do not expand by total domination. They do not expand by total domination, which of course was prominent during colonialism. Total domination, which was prominent during colonialism, but rather they expand under what we call influence. They expand under what we call influence. They develop a tendency of creating influence over the third world countries, that certain third world countries cannot do anything without the consent of these developed countries. This is what we mean by expansionist, in character. And sometimes, if they fail to use the diplomatic ways to expand, sometimes, as we said earlier, they can even use force to expand. They can even use force to expand. That is the second character of the neocolonial state. But the third way that you can use to identify this neocolonial state is interference of internal affairs of low developed countries. These countries, they are so highly interfering the affairs of the the internal affairs of low-developed countries or developing countries, developing nations. For instance, we have got country like USA. Of course, we said that USA sometimes they have assumed a role of being a policeman of the world, a policeman of the world. That means they are responsible in taking care of everything which occurs in the world. They can go to Afghanistan, they can go to Iraq, they can go to Libya, they can go to Grenada, they can go to, wherever they can, and they go to those countries. In different names. They can say, we just want to stop genocide. We just want to stop the crime against humanity. We just want to install democracy. But in fact, all in all, they're interfering the internal affairs of the low-developed countries. Another point here is the military technological superiority. These people are very highly developed in military technology, that they later think of establishing some military bases in different parts of the world. They establish military bases. And why military bases? Military bases are so important because they want to defend their interests. Remember, one of the things which characterize neocolonialism, as we said earlier, manifestation, it is multinational corporations. There are some multinational corporations which have been established in different parts of the world. So these people they have to develop in military technology because they have to defend their interests. They have to defend their investments. So this is done by establishing military bases in different parts of the world. Another point is they dominate international organization. Of course, we have said it earlier. They have the dominance in the international organizations. They have the dominance, for instance, in things like, as we have said already, they have the dominance in international organizations like UN, World Trade Organizations, and so on and so forth. And and lastly is cultural superiority. This neo-colonial power, they are so superior in terms of culture. Their medias are very powerful because one of the ways they use to spread their propaganda and control a third world country is through the use of media. I said it earlier. There is these things like a CNN. There are things like BBC, ABC, and France International, and some other international medias and so on. These are playing a very major role to the perpetuating the interests of those imperialist nations. My dear students, these are the answers to this question. And now I'm sure that you can attempt this question in case this question comes. And of course, in the conclusion to this question, conclusion is, of course, it's anything relevant, but make sure that, of course, you conclude by explaining that at the end, that in spite of all the things we have said, what the neo-colonial power is doing to third world country, it is to exploit third world country intensively. Now let's move to second question, and our question is: freedom achieved by most African countries in 1960s was political. In reference to neocolonialism, justify this statement. Remember what we said earlier, that under neocolonialism, independence which is achieved by the countries under neocolonialism, it is political. It is in fact a political independence. But economically, socially, culturally, and militarily, that country is still under the foreign rule. And this is what has been, this is what was said by Dr. Kwame Nkrumah in his book, Neocolonialism, which was published in 1966. So let's now go to look, and this question is going to be a little bit simple because most of the things, most of the points that we are going to mention here, we have already covered them. The first point here is existence of puppet leaders. Existence of puppet leaders. This is why it makes the independence which was achieved to be political. Puppet leaders. There were puppet leaders in Africa, everywhere. For instance, I mentioned earlier the role of leaders like Joseph Desiré Mobutu. Mobutu, who came to power after he overthrown after the assassination of Patrice Lumumba in 1960. So those are just the example of puppet leaders, and this is what makes the independence of third world countries to be political, but not economic. Because political only because you've got somebody you call leader of your own, but that leader of your own does not have the decision to make. He can't make a decision. He or she can't make a decision. The decisions are made from metropolitan countries. The decisions are made from London, Washington, from Paris and elsewhere, but not in the local countries, in the third world countries. The second is existence of multinational corporations. there is this existence of multinational corporations. Multinational corporations, as we said, one of the things they're doing is to exploit the third world countries. Third world countries are exploited to the maximum by these multinational corporations. And I gave you the example of how much money, for instance, is taken from the third world countries to developed countries each year from the because of these multinational corporations. These people are making profit. They come to invest in third world countries, and they are using African cheap labor. They are paying African laborers very cheap. They are exploiting African resources. They buy African resources at a very cheap price. And as a result, they are making super profit. And all the profit they have made, it is taken to bring development elsewhere. My dear students, you can look, for instance, at the you can look, for instance, at some places in Africa where mining is taking place. It's very sad that if you look at those areas where mining activities are taking place in Africa, there is no clue that that area has got minerals. Otherwise, you are going to see the impact of those mines. You are going to see them somewhere in Canada, somewhere in America, and so on and so forth. That means there is no there is no link between African resources and Africa's development. Third world resources and third world development. Rather, there is a link between third world countries' resources with development of some imperialist countries. So that's the difference we can see. My dear students, also we can look at another thing, which is the economic and technological dependence. Economic and technological dependence. This, of course, as it was explained by Andre Gunder Frank, in his dependent theory, that one of the things which makes third world countries to achieve, or African countries, as our question says, to get independence, which was political in 1960s, but not economic, social independence, or cultural independence, or even military independence, is because of economic and technological dependence. The third world countries, African countries, are so highly depending on the Western countries for technological assistance, for economic assistance. And because of that, then you'll have to adhere to some conditions. As what was said by Dambisa Moyo, that there is no such a free lunch. Don't expect to get a free lunch. Whatever you are given by the Western countries, you are going to pay it either direct or indirect. You are going to pay it in one way or another. So that's exactly what happened to most African countries. They are getting loans, they are getting aid from those developed countries, but those loans, they are becoming a burden to development of those countries and so on, because later they lead to a debt crisis. Another point is existence of imperialist military bases. There is also existence of imperialist military bases in third world countries. This, of course, we've discussed it already. Another point here is the practice of free market economy. There is free market economy, which, of course, we said it allows the third world countries resources to be taken by the developed countries. For instance, here, as you can see, we have got things like trade liberalization. Trade liberalization. There is also things like privatization. We have got things like foreign investment, allowing foreign investment and so on. So if you take the total of all those things I've mentioned, they produce nothing but exploitation of the third world countries or the African countries at the case of our question. I'm sorry, my dear students, I'm using a word third world countries because this word Africa can be repressed by third world. So if it comes to third world, you can use the same point because African countries are among the third world countries. Another thing that is the dominance of Western media and culture. We are talking of the Western media which are so powerful. There is this issue of brain drain. People who have been educated in third world countries are taken to work, they are encouraged to go to work in the developed countries. And also there is African people, they are the producers of raw materials. That is the question. And as you can see, this question can be answered, this question can be answered by using these points, my dear students. Let's now go to the last question, which is why African states are termed as underdeveloped nation, despite having abundance of resources. While probably, frankly speaking, I'm not going to spend much time in this question because it's so open, it's so direct. You can see these are the internal factors: corruption, political instability, lack of good governance, low level of education, tribalism, religionism, monoculture, and so on. And you can go to external factors, as you have seen: foreign aid, brain drain, unequal exchange, foreign investment, oil crisis, all these things we have discussed. So, my dear students, based on what we have discussed so far, I'm quite sure that now you can answer the question, not only the one I gave it to you, not only the one we have discussed, but now you can answer all the questions which comes from this topic, my dear students. My dear students, we have come to the end of our today's revision lesson, and next time we are going to look at the efforts which were employed to solve the problem of underdevelopment. Of course, it has got some parts to deal with. You know, we are going to look at things like the Brandit reports. We are going to look at the South Commission. We are going to look at, the non-aligned movement. And finally, we are going to look at structural adjustment program. My dear students, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Goodbye. Let's meet next time.